Good afternoon. Welcome back to the B&H virtual event space. You are tuned into Liquid in Motion, capturing movement in beverage photography, hosted by Sony. For that, I'd like to welcome back to the program the wonderful Jordan Hughes. Jordan, what's going on, man?
Hey, thanks for having me back. I'm excited.
I'm glad we didn't scare you away. So just you being here, your presence means, we did our thing the first time around.
Yes, totally.
Awesome. Well, I'm looking forward to this today. I know we got a lot of people out there that are ready with their notepads and their questions. So I do hope you guys get your questions in. That's the whole benefit of doing the live thing, is being able to have your questions answered on the spot. So I'm going to turn it over to the man who does it best. And Jordan, I'll see you in a bit for some Q&A.
Awesome. Sounds great. Well, yeah, had somebody DM me on Instagram saying she was rescheduling her physical therapy appointment so she could be here live to take notes and ask questions. So, way to prioritize. Appreciate that. Yeah, so for those of you who don't know me, again, my name is Jordan Hughes. I'm a professional beverage photographer. So I work with a lot of liquor brands, primarily liquor brands. That's kind of why I have this kind of bar scene behind me in my studio here in Portland, Oregon. But also work with a variety of companies, from like kombucha companies, tea brands, kind of all form of beverages. I do a lot of kind of craft cocktail stuff myself. So that's where the focus tends to be, on the cocktail side of things. But today we're going to be working through kind of a variety of beverages, kind of working with coffee, wine, as well as cocktails. Because again, it's kind of my specialty. So for me, just to give you kind of brief overview, kind of started out as like a recipe blogger type person, where sharing cocktail recipes on my blog called High Proof Preacher back in 2017. Kind of snowballed from there, of just kind of in the blog world, and then moving over to Instagram. And then as I was doing that, I started working with a lot of local distilleries, as well as restaurants, some kind of hotel, kind of hospitality groups, doing photography for them. So I was becoming more well known for my imagery and how I captured beverages and products and all of that. So very much just kind of moved into being a commercial photographer in the kind of hospitality space. And that's kind of where I am now. I have a studio here in Portland, Oregon, where I'm based, where I've grown up even. And yeah, so I do, a variety of stuff in studio here, as well as on location. Again, like, there's some hotel clients where I'll go to their hotel or, bar or restaurant, what have you, to capture their food menu, drink menu. So it ends up being more than just beverages. But again, the beverage world is very much what I focus on, and what I'd say I most enjoy. So today, I'm going to kind of click over to share my screen here, and let's see. There we go. If you guys can see that, I'm going to pop the chat open too. I'll try to keep an eye on the chat. We might have to, I might kind of just roll through some stuff, pause to kind of look at some questions. I do try to answer some questions as I go, just so you don't have to wait fully all the way to the end. But we'll see here if I can kind of keep up with it. But yeah, today I wanted to kind of dive into capturing liquid in motion, as you can see. So with this, when I tell people I'm a beverage photographer or drink photographer, I show them, like, yeah, I take pictures of cocktails or wine or whatever. A lot of times people go like, okay, so it's mostly still life stuff. And that's where I go, like, actually, not really. It certainly can be. I mean, you can take a picture of where the first thing we're going to be shooting today is a cup of coffee, and you can, yeah, just put a cup of coffee on a tabletop and take a picture. And yeah, I guess that's technically still life. But part of what kind of got me into beverage photography and got me so excited about it was very much like the just liquid itself, and being able to capture it in various forms, whether it's being poured or splashed, or even with some of these things we're talking about today. Like, when I was sharing about this seminar, I wanted to say, like, this is deeper than just kind of the splash photos, which has kind of become something that It's fun and cool to do. And in the kind of cocktail photo world, a lot of people do it where you drop a big chunk of ice into a cocktail and you capture the moment where it splashes out of the glass. And like, it's really fun and cool looking the first few times you do it. But it is kind of like, why would you actually do that? Why would you put all this time and work into making a beautiful cocktail or pouring this nice glass of wine to just splash it everywhere? And it's like, hey, it's art. You don't need a good reason, right? But there's a certain level where I try to make my imagery and the movement in my imagery actually make sense for the drink itself. Trying to actually capture a part of the process that actually makes sense if someone was, being prepared that cup of coffee or being served that glass of wine, and more just like capturing part of that movement, whether it's simply pouring or one of the things that we'll talk about is kind of garnishing a cocktail and kind of freezing like a moment that's actually realistic, something that would actually happen when you're preparing a drink or being served a drink. So that's where I want to dive in today, to a few different aspects of dynamic motion, capturing these motions in beverage photography in a way that makes sense, that's realistic, and will actually help your imagery stand out to beverage clients or hospitality clients. So that's kind of the overview goal for today. And I do kind of a few kind of basic tips, guidelines. These I actually shared in a previous webinar with B&H, I think in December, when we were just kind of talking overview of beverage photography. So these are just kind of some good considerations to keep in mind. A big one for me is using off-camera flash. You can certainly do beverage photography with natural light, placing drinks close to windows to get as much lighting as possible. I've just found, especially when it comes to capturing motion, using off-camera flash, strobes, a speed light, whatever you have, will really help freeze motion really crisp and really high amount of detail with less motion blur. So if you haven't used off-camera flash before, it's okay. It's definitely a learning curve. I'm sure there's plenty of resources on B&H, as well as my own YouTube channel. Cocktail Camera is kind of my e-learning platform. I have some stuff about off-camera flash and tutorials around that. Definitely something worth diving into and learning more about. Another one is light before liquid, which we'll do a bit today as well, of just making sure you have your lighting and really your set kind of built out before you pour a drink and start taking photos. Especially this is important when you're making cocktails or something where you kind of have a certain amount of time before the drink starts to die or melt. So that's where it's important to kind of have just an empty glass, set up your lighting, kind of take some test shots to make sure things look the way you want it to look before you actually pour the drink. Because once you pour the drink, it's go time. You got to be pretty dialed in. Third one I have, more diffusion, basically just saying there, having kind of different options to diffuse your lighting, to soften it, because we're often capturing glassware here with a variety of drinks where shooting a small subject, often in a glass that is reflective or see-through. So, it's going to reflect your light source, your window, your flash. So having, different types of soft boxes or diffusion panels, again, some of which we'll go through today, will really help to just give you more options for diffusing that light. Last one here is more specific to cocktails, but using matte barware. Again, this is kind of talking about reducing reflections. I've kind of have this thing where, not sure if I have any within reach, but I have like little jiggers, which are made for measuring cocktail ingredients, and they're almost always reflective. And I always kind of make it like a fun thing in some of my photos where like you can zoom in and find the reflection of me with my camera in the reflection of the jigger. But if you're shooting for a client or whatever, you probably want to use barware or props that have a matte finish that aren't reflective. That will just kind of minimize, that sort of work of trying to Photoshop yourself out of the reflections and things. So anyway, those are some general tips. And again, these slides, all of this material I'm going through will be available for download for you. So take notes. That always kind of helps me remember stuff, but also don't feel like you have to write down everything. You will be able to get access to all of this. So today, this session sponsored by Sony, which was pretty easy because I'm already a Sony user, big Sony fan. Been using a lot of their stuff for years at this point. So just to go through the gear I'm using, I'm trying to keep it relatively simple, which I know is relative. It's like I do have a studio. I'm working with kind of some big, lighting here, but I'm trying to keep everything to one light, one camera, one lens, just trying to keep it kind of as simple across the board as I can. So I'm using a Sony A7R IV. The lens I'm using is 100 millimeter, 2.8 G Master. I really kind of go between that one and the Sony 90 millimeter macro. A lot of times just when capturing beverages, a lot of small subjects, whether that's food, product, more in that kind of 90, maybe kind of 85 to 100 millimeter range, I've found to be the sweet spot. Get some nice compression there. You shoot something on like a 50 or 35, something a little wider, you're going to start worrying about more distortion and your lines are going to get a little off. So I usually stay in the kind of 85, 90 to 100 millimeter range for lenses. And tomorrow I'm doing another webinar on B&H all about what specific lenses I bring to food and drink shoots. So if you want to check out that's tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern as well. So we'll dive deeper into lenses there. Lighting, I'm using a Godox 80-1200 Pro. So pretty powerful strobe. Honestly, you don't need something this crazy powerful. I work with a lot of like 100-watt strobes, 200-watt speed lights even. So this is just kind of what I use in my studio. And then for a lot of my surfaces and backgrounds, I'm using Ericsson surfaces. They're all these kind of real wood photography surfaces, and then V flats for bounce cards and flags. So that's just kind of overview of gear. And as we kind of go through stuff, I do try to put up kind of camera settings as well as the gear and everything I'm using in each kind of photo here. So so to dive into the meat of it here, I want to go through 3 different types of beverages. This first one is coffee. Again, like I'm primarily shooting cocktails and, beverages of the more alcoholic variety. But coffee is one that I get a lot of messages about from students or followers on Instagram of like, hey, tips around capturing coffee, because it is, something that is a common ask if you're shooting for a cafe, a restaurant even, but it's something that can be kind of challenging because it's just, it's this dark cup of hot liquid. There's not, at least at first glance or first thought, it's kind of like, what can I do to make this look interesting? Right. So we're going to try and do that today. And that's where I've kind of already gone through and shot this so I can kind of show you kind of my process more easily. But I just have this on like this, again, this Ericsson surface, this wood background. I'll click back here. You can kind of see on the side, I have this strip box. I think that's a 16 by 48 inch strip box with a strobe. And I have it kind of boomed up and over the cup a little bit. And I have these V flats where I just, again, going with one light for all the shots today, just again, trying to keep it simple. I put some black flags or black V flats on the back there because I was getting a little bit too much of a reflection on the background on the surface. So I was trying to kind of block that off a bit just to make it a little more even light-wise on the surface. And then I put a white V flat or bounce card opposite of the flash just to fill in some shadows, just so my mug isn't like too dark and shadowy. I kind of lean into the dark, moody look, which works a lot with a lot of the cocktail and bar photography I do. A lot of those spaces are kind of dark and moody. But that's where it's like, I don't want this to be too shadowy, too moody. But here we're just looking at, black coffee, white cup. I at least try to go with some natural contrast there. Obviously, a dark cup with a dark liquid is going to be really tough. So try to add in any element of contrast I can. But here, what I'm aiming to do here, and this is something I do with a lot of kind of boring drinks, whether it's coffee, whether it's a plain cocktail, is I think about adding ripples to the surface. So what I do here is I get like a little dropper bottle. These are something you can get at grocery stores, drugstores. A lot of people use them with like essential oils, that sort of thing. So with that, I usually just take the dropper. I take a little bit of liquid out of, the drink I'm shooting. And then I, drop it back in and capture these ripples in the drink. So generally how I do that, I have my light set up as I showed you, kind of boomed over the top. Camera wise, I have my camera kind of mounted down at an angle. Hopefully you can kind of see that on the side there. So I can see the liquid itself. And then I have like a remote trigger for doing the shutter, but I found it a bit easier to just set my camera on a timer, unless I'm kind of shooting with an assistant and kind of have a few more hands. If it's just me, I kind of set it on a timer. I do like a 3 image burst, can kind of count down with it. And then right before the shutter goes, I can drop just a few drops of, in this case, coffee, just kind of disturbing the surface of the liquid to get these ripple shots. So it takes a little bit of practice, kind of getting the timing right. And it's one of those things you kind of just do over and over. And once you do it, it's actually kind of fun. So a few kind of techniques, kind of some guidelines for you when doing a shot like this is being aware of your reflection. Kind of far left here, you see that the reflection of the light is kind of cutting the surface in half. Again, this far left where it kind of has the green corner on there, that's what I'm going for, where there's kind of this light and dark on the surface. That's going to give you the best result when you're doing kind of these ripple images. The one in the center is where it's like the reflection is kind of taking over the whole surface, and the far right is where there's no reflection of the light in it. And both of those two options, the middle and far right, it's just not going to be as dramatic of an effect. So for me, if your strobe or your flash kind of has like a modeling lamp, you can kind of push it around, look in your camera and see, where that reflection shows up. You kind of just have to push it, away from you or towards you to get it just right to kind of cut it in half like that. And that's just going to give you best results. And then here I'll show you kind of some of my first attempts here. And these ones are kind of a bit more dramatic. As you can see, you get that light and dark contrast. The ripples really show up. And with some of those, like, this kind of zooms in a little closer. So it shows you some camera settings and all of that. When you're holding the dropper like really high above the cup itself, it's going to be a lot more dramatic. You're going to get little drops kind of shooting out, which again is cool if you're going for that, but it can be a little much. So generally I will actually try to go a little closer to the surface. That will just give you a little more subtle ripples, maybe a little more realistic. Here I'll go to the next slide here, and you can kind of see some that I would more likely go with if I was shooting for a coffee shop or a coffee brand. I honestly really like the far left one. That's just like, the perfect ripples. And you can see right in the middle, it's got that, that perfectly bifurcated surface of dark light, dark light. But even that in the middle one, it might be a little too intense. It might kind of give you a Jurassic Park vibes, right? Of like, oh, I think there's a T-Rex walking towards this table of coffee. So probably the one on the far right is probably most realistic. It's not super dramatic, but it just disturbs the surface enough to give you just this added element of interest. Again, it's not a ton of movement. It's not like we're pouring coffee or doing anything too crazy here, but it just adds this little element that just draws you in a little more to the photo, that makes it a little more enticing and dynamic than just shooting a cup of coffee just plain on its own. It just gives it this little sense of life and of interest. And that's what I'm going for here is, again, like I mentioned, kind of splash photography. We could drop something into this coffee or this cup or whatever we're shooting to make it splash out or do something crazy, but that's not necessarily, make someone go like, oh, I want to buy this cup of coffee or sip this cup of coffee. I'm trying to make this drink look more appealing and more inviting. And oftentimes the more subtle movement, the more subtle elements are what's going to make that more effective. So hopefully that kind of gives you an idea here. And just for the sake of kind of showing you an example, here's the no reflection one that I mentioned, where, the softbox itself isn't visible in the surface. I tried doing a dropper, and that far right, you can barely see the ripples. You can kind of see it, but it's not very clear. So just emphasizing there to, when you can, try to get that surface to kind of be cut in half like that far left photo there. So that's kind of my process for capturing coffee, or even just kind of some boring cocktails. That's an easy way to make your image look a little more exciting, a little more fun. So let me pause here really quick. I just wanted to take a look if I have anything in the chat. I think we're okay for now. So I'll keep kind of plugging ahead just so we can kind of learn everything here, and then should be able to jump in some questions if you guys have any. So yeah, so next, jumping into some wine photography. Again, this isn't necessarily my specialty. I've shot for a few wineries here and there. And a lot of that ends up being kind of on location stuff. And then, a handful of time there, it's more product focused imagery, which would be this kind of in studio. And a typical ask, I feel like, for a winery, for a wine brand, is wanting like this perfect kind of swirl shot when you're pouring the wine. So with this, I have my lighting set up a little differently than before. You can't really see the flash, but this far left photo, it's behind this big kind of diffusion panel. And this diffusion panel, I kind of homemade. I bought everything from B&H. Hey, who would have thought? But I got like I'm trying to remember what exactly it was, but it was like a flag, like it's like this metal frame, which I can't remember the exact product name, but I could probably find it and share it here at the end. But it's this big metal frame, and then got some like Lee diffusion paper or material that I then use kind of white gaffer tape to attach to it. So I kind of this big translucent square. And again, this is just like pretty thick, but diffusion material. So I have a flash with a softbox behind it, and basically shooting right into the light. So it's very heavily backlighting. Here's kind of another angle here, very much backlighting my wine glass. And here's just kind of a few, again, kind of basic tips, similar to what I shared at the beginning. We're having a clean glassware, which maybe goes without saying, but oftentimes we're just like, I can always clone stuff out in Photoshop or fix it later. But really, cleaning dust or fingerprints on a wine glass or cocktail glass is such a pain. So it's so much more worth it to just get your glassware as perfectly clean as possible. If I'm shooting with an assistant for a brand, I usually will have them be on glassware duty. I'll usually have multiple of the same glasses just so I can do multiple pours, because generally you can't just do this in one take. You'll want to kind of pour the wine a few different times, which also, showing there on the far right image, I have like this little decanter. I think it's actually for coffee, but it's kind of this decanter thing where I could pour the wine back in. It has a little pour spout, so I could more easily pour it back into the bottle and kind of keep pouring so I can get multiple shots. But yeah, that's kind of some general guidelines. If you can have, some multiple glasses, if someone kind of wiping down, keeping glassware perfectly clean, that will make your job or your editor's job so much easier. I think most of us are probably doing our own edits and retouching. It will make your life so much easier. Just get your glassware as clean as possible, especially when using flash and backlighting like this. It's just going to show the details really, really precisely. So I can't overemphasize the keeping the glassware clean, but you get the idea. So with this, again, kind of getting the perfect wine swirl, what we're doing here is getting that kind of first moment the wine hits the glass. And to do this, you really want to pour pretty quickly. I feel like the first few times I started doing this, I was like, I'm just going to try to be really careful. But the pour doesn't look as good. You get kind of awkward dribbles coming through, and you really got to just like go for it, full send, pour as forcefully into the glass as you can and get it all in the glass. And generally, it's really just the first probably 2-3 ounces that hit the glass is what's going to look good. And I can show you some examples here. This is probably my first take when I was doing these photos. Really light, kind of this first one. You get a nice kind of arch on this pour. You get some of the details of it hitting the glass. That second one's kind of cool. You get an awkward drip, in addition to the pour, but it looks kind of cool regardless. And again, that's part of the magic of using off-camera flash. Like I'm shooting at 1/100 shutter speed here, which isn't like a very fast shutter speed. But with a flash, especially shooting indoors, I'm like exposing out all my ambient light. The only light in this image is from my flash. So your flash is very, very fast. That essentially becomes your new shutter. So I'm freezing motion perfectly crisp here. It kind of doesn't really matter what my shutter speed's at as long as my ambient light is exposed out. Um, but yeah, and then kind of this third image on the far right, as you can see, like once the glass starts filling up a little, then it just looks really dark. And this is more the case when shooting with red wine. Of course, it just kind of swallows light, and it's not really, with the pour there, you're seeing the color, the light is coming through the pour, but it's not really coming through or backlighting the liquid in the glass. So that's where when I'm capturing these images, I'm really just trying to get that first second or split second of pouring the wine into the glass to really make it stand out and look awesome. So that's where I pour it back, like this image on the right, and pouring it back in this thing, pouring it back into the bottle. And for this shoot, I was kind of dumb and I only brought one glass, so I had to go over to my sink, wash it out, take my nice polishing cloth, get it all dry and clean, and then pour it again. So it took me a little while. These next ones are probably some of my favorites. That middle one, I think, is kind of my winning shot. That's kind of or that one or far right, maybe, where you're getting some nice light on the bottle. The bottle's still pretty dark in silhouette, but you get a few details kind of coming through of the bottle color. That middle one, you get a nice arch of the pour, but it's also kind of shooting up on the other side of the glass. And again, that's what a lot of brands kind of are asking for. Or kind of want this like perfect like pour, and then this cool little wave of wine just makes it look very, I want to jump into that glass right now. So that's kind of what I'm aiming for. I also really like this one on the far right. You get some cool details as it's hitting the glass and shooting up on the side a little bit too. I'm just not as much of a fan of kind of the angle of the wine going in. And then this one on far left kind of looks cool too. The glass is probably a little too full at this point, but I kind of like the little S curve going on. So again, this is something where you can pour it multiple times, give it a few takes here, as I put here, just keep pouring. It's one of those things where yeah, if you're kind of under a time crunch, you just gotta take what you can get. But I feel like once you're going, if you want to practice this on your own, it ends up being just very fun. Because yeah, I was just shooting these photos to prepare for this session, and I was like, I'm just going to keep pouring this wine and see what I get, because every time I did it, it was a little different. And yeah, it's just something that just gets really fun, and maybe just for nerdy people like me. But it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, it's like you don't know exactly what the results are going to be each time. So you just keep going for it. So yeah, so I have my camera settings there. Again, shooting at 1/100, aperture f10. So that's something too, where a lot of times when you're shooting at a longer focal length, again, I'm using that Sony 100mm G Master. I'm shooting at f10. So with that, a longer focal length, you're going to have a really thin focus area. So you generally do have to close down your aperture to get, a good focus area, especially when you're shooting a small subject or you're shooting liquid in motion, where you aren't totally sure, it isn't always super precise of where you're going to be moving. So I just try to get as much detail as possible. So that's where I generally try to shoot pretty close down on my aperture, like f8, f10. Sometimes I'm shooting at f16, but with that, you need a lot more light. That's where having these 1200s, these bigger strobes, really help, because you can then compensate with a really small aperture and get a lot of light to just capture a lot of detail. So that's oftentimes what I'm going for with beverage photography, especially movement like this, where having a lot of depth of field and a blurry background doesn't matter as much, or since you're shooting at a longer focal length, you're getting nice compression and kind of background separation anyway. But with this, yeah, I'm shooting at f10 and really just turning up the power of my light to make sure I have enough light to expose this. So, yeah. So that's wine. That's at least kind of some of the fun shots that I like doing with wine, which can, again, be a challenging drink in itself, similar to coffee, where oftentimes it's like you're just capturing liquid sitting there in a glass. So it's kind of coming up with elements for, to capture the movement, to actually make it look more inviting and exciting. So this next one going more into cocktails. There's a lot of things with cocktail photography that I could get into. So again, that's very much my specialty, what I really love and enjoy doing for a lot of reasons. I mean, I kind of showed you a few shots here of, there's just so many elements to making cocktails. Kind of contrasts to what I said with wine or coffee, not knocking wine or coffee, but like with something with wine or beer, there's only like these few brief moments of motion where it's like you're maybe pouring beer from a tap or pouring wine from a bottle, maybe swirling. Versus cocktails, it's like you can capture the whole process of making a cocktail. You can show dashes of bitters, pouring different ingredients into a mixing glass or a shaker. Different cocktails are going to be different and have different ingredients, different elements of movement. There's going to be, different garnishing techniques. There's going to be, different powders or different, citrus oils, different things that will bring different elements that are all very exciting creatively and challenging to capture. So that's part of why I got into cocktail photography and why I've stuck with it for 7 years now, where it's like there's just so many different challenges and fun aspects of capturing it. And it's not just the liquid and the cocktails, it also leads into portraiture, where I'm capturing bartenders. And that's really fun when it comes to shooting portraiture as well, because I have found with capturing bartenders and, people in their element making drinks, I don't really have to put them at ease at all. I just tell them, do your thing, make the drink. You don't have to pose or slow down or do anything for me. You just do your thing. I'll make you look good. And then they're like, cool. They're comfortable. They're set. They're doing their thing. And it just creates some really cool and dynamic imagery. So that's that's why you should get into cocktail photography, because it is just really fun. And there's just so many aspects to it. So for today, though, I'm kind of getting into a shot that I've become kind of well known for, and that's the zest shot. And I have like a full tutorial on this on my YouTube channel, the cocktail camera channel, because there are a few different elements that can be a little tricky to capturing this, but I'll kind of give you the crash course. It's a little tricky of just kind of getting the timing right at first, but once you get it, it's something similar to like what I said with doing all the wine pours. Once you do it, it's like, this is just fun. And it's always a little different every time you do it. But the zest shot refers to like this final step when capturing cocktails, and a lot of classic cocktails where you take like a strip of orange peel or lemon peel, any type of citrus, and you take it between your fingertips and you just gently squeeze it, the skin facing outwards over the cocktail, and it releases like this very fine mist of like fragrant essential oil that lands on the cocktail. So then when someone takes a sip, they're getting this aroma of fresh citrus. So that's how you'd finish like an old fashioned, Negroni, sometimes a martini. You might do a lemon twist on there and get some lemon oil. But it's something where in real life, you don't really notice it unless it's lit perfectly, unless there's really direct backlighting kind of illuminating this mist. Generally, it's almost invisible. It's just this very fine mist. It's not like liquid or drops of liquid. So it was something that really really enticed me, I guess, as a photographer, because it was something that was a bit elusive. Again, kind of a reaction to a lot of the splash photography I was seeing of people dropping ice and had these very cool dramatic photos, but it was just kind of like it's almost anxiety inducing. You're like, here's this beautiful cocktail and you destroyed it for a photo. And again, it's art, whatever. It's cool and it's awesome. But I wanted to capture something again that's like, this is realistic. And this is something that people don't often notice. And I want to kind of bring attention to these finer details. So again, doing this, it's capturing this citrus zest. And again, how you can kind of see I have this strip box, same one I used in the first example, 16 inches by 48 inches, I think. And I have it very much backlighting me, backlighting the cocktail. Again, it helps to have an assistant or a bartender you're working with here. Shooting on your own, as I've kind of mastered for a lot of my studio work, using a shutter remote or kind of counting down with a timer on a 3-image burst. Sony makes it really easy to just kind of adjust to 10 seconds, 3 images, and just really quick, just boom, boom, boom. Helpful with capturing a kind of elusive shot like this because it is so quick and so brief. But definitely having strong backlighting. As you can see, I'm shooting kind of at an angle to my light, backlighting the drink, and also have a dark background just to have a lot of contrast because, again, it's this very fine mist. And as you can see in these images, having a dark background just allows that to stand out really well. You could use different colored backgrounds or lighter backgrounds. You're just not going to see this quite as dramatically. So really having kind of 3 elements: strong direct backlighting, and really off-camera flash is kind of essential for doing this. I've seen some people pull it off with natural light, but you got to have like really direct, strong sunlight to really make this pop and stand out. So backlighting with the flash, a dark background for contrast. And then third, I'd say, is having fresh citrus, which can be tricky. I've talked with a lot of students in my own kind of e-courses and stuff who just don't have access to fresh citrus. They're in certain areas of the world where, they're getting citrus shipped out to them, and they just don't have enough oil in the skin to accomplish this. So that can be tricky too if you're in a region that doesn't have fresh citrus. I have found that cold citrus works a lot better. So putting an orange or a lemon in the fridge for an hour or two, I think something about that just helps the oil either come to the surface. I don't really know exactly. That just seems to be the case. Maybe the skin kind of stiffens up a bit. So you can get a little bit more oil out of it. I've also found that lemons are, like I'm using a lemon peel here, a lot more of a dramatic essential oil effect versus oranges. So if you're practicing starting out and it's tricky, maybe start with just a bunch of lemons and see what you can get. So these photos is generally what I'm going for. There's always a little bit of a balancing act here with kind of just your light. As you can see, it's a bit hot on my shirt, kind of in the background. That's kind of drawing your eye away from the drink. So maybe I would set up something to kind of block the light to flag it off a bit. I found it just easier for my second attempt here, just to kind of step out of frame, just to keep the attention on the cocktail and on that mist coming out. Again, this is like 10-second timer, switch it to a 3-image burst. And I'm keeping my flash power at like 1/16. So on full power, if you're doing like a multi-image burst, your flash might have a hard time keeping up. So I kind of keep it a little lower power, or just at least not full power, so it can kind of keep up with like just 3 quick shots. So I've kind of, what I do, I just kind of hold it in place, set the focus, hit the shutter to start the countdown. And I can kind of count down with it and just squeeze it right as it goes. And I kind of get these 3 shots right off the bat. So again, there's kind of my camera settings for this. Maybe slightly different than before. I was a little wider open on my aperture, I think, because I just I didn't want my fingers to be totally, silhouette kind of blacked out, since it is strong backlighting here. But that's kind of what we're looking at for this zest shot. And again, this is something that can be a little tricky. Just takes a bit of practice to get the timing and kind of the right citrus in place to make it happen. But again, it's something that's just so fun. Once you figure it out, you almost get addicted to it. It's just like you're just do it nonstop. So yeah, so that's at least one element to capturing cocktails that I really enjoy, and something that is that does demonstrate quite amount of skill and precision and patience, and something that really makes your imagery stand out, because it's not something that just anyone can just go out and be like, oh yeah, I'm going to capture a zest shot. It does take a bit of time and practice and intention to make it happen. So really, as with all of these, here's kind of our, at least my favorite 3 shots from the session. Again, it's like there's a lot of different things you can do. Like I said, with cocktails being my favorite, there's many things there. And again, I'm sure there's a lot of things with wine and coffee that I haven't thought about as well. So um, those are all, each kind of form of liquid kind of has its own challenge. And honestly, I feel like that's part of the fun of beverage photography is like now 7 years in, very much in the kind of beverage focus. I feel like I'm still learning stuff. I'm still kind of figuring things out. I have my little tactics like, oh yeah, I always have my dropper bottles with me. I'm always doing these little ripples or these little pour shots. So I kind of have my go-to things, but it's very much something that I'm learning and exploring on my own as well. And yeah, and I feel like that's part of the fun is like I never quite feeling like I've fully mastered it. Like I'm also very much a student of this work as well as I go. And I feel like that's kind of the key to longevity in any industry, but especially in kind of photography and really any niche of photography is always being open to learning and figuring out new techniques and new things. Because for me, honestly, it just keeps me from getting bored and keeps me excited and motivated to keep going and keep learning. So yeah, so that's what I have for you guys. I also just wanted to throw in a quick I have a little discount for you if you wanted to jump into. I have a Cocktail Camera Pro e-course, all on-demand content that kind of dives into pretty deep into off-camera flash stuff, as well as capturing beverages, bartenders, shooting in dark environments like bars and restaurants, using one light, using multiple lights, doing kind of high detail, photography stuff for like liquor brands and all of that. So have like a discount that just goes till the end of today if you want to jump on that. You can go to cocktailcamera.com and I have multiple courses there, but discount on the pro course, which is kind of my main kind of master class thing if you guys want to check that out. But yeah, and like I said, we'll be we'll have the slides, the visuals from this session as well available to you, so you can have those for reference as well. So yeah, and then we got some time to talk and answer questions. It looks like.
Awesome. Looks like we already got some questions in. So a huge thank you again, Jordan. Let's start with what seems to be a recurring theme in the questions: props, fake stuff, tricks. I know you had
Yeah,
discussed this in a past one, but for those that didn't catch it, do you ever use anything? Are you using anything liquor substitutes? Are you using any of these little tricks that we love to see in like BuzzFeed lists that food and drink photographers sometimes substitute
yeah,
in for the real thing?
yeah, totally. So I mean, even like that cocktail I shot at the end, that was soy sauce and water. So generally I'm like, if I'm posting or sharing a recipe, oftentimes with, liquor brands, they're like a recipe that features their thing. They, their product, they want it to actually be made so it looks as realistic as possible, what the consumer would make. But oftentimes it's like, if you're just kind of mocking up a cocktail, there are different things where, yeah, like I said, soy sauce, some sort of browning sauce, just doing a little bit of that with water, honestly looks pretty realistic to whiskey, a darker brown cocktail, which is a pretty common kind of color for a lot of cocktails. Um, I think when you're just capturing a drink on its own, doing that works. Also, several students of mine say like they use a lot of different colored teas just to get different colors of cocktails, right? That's an inexpensive way. It is a little more challenging when there's movement, like if you're pouring something. And again, it's a very subtle thing, but since liquor tends to be more viscous, it's like a different texture. When you're pouring it, it is more of this like clean ribbon versus if you're pouring tea or soy sauce and water, you kind of get like this chunkier look. And again, it's a very subtle detail. It's probably something that most people wouldn't notice, but that is one consideration. Like if you're capturing liquid in motion, it's a little more telling of like what you're using because just the texture will be different. But yeah, oftentimes like when it's just capturing a cocktail on its own, just kind of sitting there, I will kind of use kind of fake ingredients or inexpensive ingredients. I honestly, just again, to maintain the texture, I have a really cheap bottle of vodka and a really cheap bottle of whiskey in the studio that I just use for photo purposes. It's not for, it's probably not going to taste as good, but it's again just to maintain the look of the texture if there's movement and all of that. Because it's kind of like with spirits, you generally have kind of clear or dark. So just having those inexpensive bottles helps a lot. And then there's a lot of stuff around ice and fake ice, which is another thing when you're capturing drinks where, that does help just because ice is going to melt on you and you're going to get, little drops on the glass. So, fake ice is always tricky because, you know, it's like you kind of have to get the really good fake ice for it to really look convincing. Bad fake ice looks really bad. So it's tricky to find the right ones. And I always kind of go back and forth. I haven't really found like a brand of fake ice that I really love. But that's definitely like a whole world in itself as well. I'm generally kind of just have a lot of ice on hand and I'll swap stuff out as needed, but that's definitely something to explore. If you find a good brand of fake ice, let me know because I'm interested. I'm in the market.
Does it matter if you're shooting for a brand? I would think that with brands being so controlling over like style guidelines and really the color might matter to a brand versus if you're just like, hey, I'm doing it on my own channel. I'm making a mixed drink. It's obviously not
Yeah,
going to be, you're not going to have the integrity of the color or the texture once you start adding mixers. Does that matter at all or no?
right. I mean, it depends on the brand, on the client. Yeah, like for some brands I've worked for, like, they have their kind of their deck or just like a sheet where it's just like, here's our do or dies, where
Mhm.
I think for a lot of liquor brands though, it's like when you're thinking cocktails, like they know it's going to be mixed with other stuff and it's going to appear differently. Um, for certain brands, they just have like there's been a few that come to mind where it's like they just have their very specific kind of approved cocktails where they're like, this is like our brand cocktail. We're going to use a Gold Rush, it's whiskey, lemon juice, honey. So it's pretty like they can have a little more control on like what you're making and what it looks like. But really, it just depends on the brand and yeah, what their preferences are. It's a little bit more, the color stuff is a little more specific when you're capturing like the bottle in it, where it's making sure like
Gotcha.
the label colors and everything are accurate. Because sometimes throwing flash onto a bottle kind of changes the appearance of the color of the liquid or of the label. So that's the stuff that gets a little more tricky, I feel like. So yeah.
All right. I'm going to throw it out there because we did get a comment and not a question. It's a great course if you haven't done it, speaking from experience. So I see people asking. We did have a discount code that Jordan did drop in that's going to be good until midnight tonight. So
Yeah.
definitely check that out. And seeing as we get a lot of questions on these types of events when we have Jordan on, we may not get to all the questions. So he does have all those courses. Definitely, we love when people support our speakers. We did, Jordan did a discount code for you guys just for that specific reason. So head over there. We have a vouching from Aston Whiteout in the audience who has learned from experience. Move into another question. Donna's asking about tethering. Do you tether all the time?
Yeah, I don't all the time. Generally, like if I'm shooting for a client, I do just so it's like I have biggest screen possible, can look on my monitor. Occasionally I'll have a client who's either in studio, an art director, someone, or sometimes there's someone who's like zooming in. And I can like have it tethered and I can kind of share my screen and they can see as I'm shooting. For me, when I'm just like on my own in the studio. A lot of times I'm like the client isn't present. I'm just shooting for myself or shooting just by myself. I'll either tether or um, for me, like I just like having fewer things connected to the camera, which is kind of silly. It's just my own weird thing. Even with like video stuff, I have monitors and different things for, easier viewing and all of that. But I'm just kind of weird where I'm like, I want less things kind of distracting me from the camera itself. Even having stuff on a salon stand or tripod, obviously a lot of product work, you have to have it kind of locked off and all of that. But it's kind of my own little weird thing where I love being able to just like holding the camera, looking through the viewfinder, I just found if there's other things or a monitor I have to have a battery on, or a cord that's not working, it just kind of pulls me out of the creative space. So for me, I'm just always trying to go as simple of a set as possible just to kind of keep me in that creative space. So yeah, I do tether, not all the time. It's definitely more of like the bigger commercial shoots where you kind of have to be tethered. You have to have your eyes on everything. But yeah, with that, it's like then the bigger commercial shoots, that's where I'm like, I could have an assistant or a digitech or someone, again, because that kind of helps me kind of stay in the creative space of it, right? Again, that's kind of my own weird stuff, but that's my take or my experience at least.
Perfect. Perfect. We had some more people asking about the discount code. We're going to get that dropped in for you guys into the comment
Oh,
section.
sure.
So if you're on Zoom, we'll get it dropped into the chat there. If you're on YouTube, Vimeo, we'll get that dropped into the comment section for you guys because we did have some people asking about that.
Yeah, yeah.
Good question here from Aston. I like this. Does the process change at all depending on what medium the images are for? For example, social media versus
Yeah,
publication.
right. Yeah, that's where it's kind of funny these days, where even, a lot of the commercial shoots, whether it's photo or video, it's always kind of like, oh, we need to make sure this is vertical so we can use it on social media, or, you pull out these nice cameras for shooting video stuff or whatever. It's like, we gotta turn it on its side so it can be, used on a phone. So there's definitely that consideration where, I'll usually try to ask like, okay, like what is the intended purpose? What's kind of the priority here? Oftentimes clients will want multiple uses, which you can charge for. Obviously if you're, shooting photos or video, we're talking photo here, like, yeah, it's like sometimes you can crop in to vertical if you're shooting everything in landscape. But I've found a lot of times I just style things differently. If I have things laid out in landscape, well, if I'm turning it vertical, I'm cropping out a significant portion of my image. So I generally try not to just do like, oh, we can crop it. I'm like, no, if we're shooting, if we need a specific shot in both landscape and portrait, that's going to be two different things. Like we're going to style it differently and set up the camera differently just to get the best results. So, yeah. And then when it comes digital to, publication sort of thing, I mean, generally it's not a huge deal. Like I'm always shooting in RAW. So I can, get the most resolution, best quality out of it for if it's being printed somewhere, versus, putting it on social. We can always, export out a smaller size or a, 72 DPI or whatever. So generally it's like I'm always shooting raw anyway. So it's just like that's kind of best practice, regardless of where the photos are going to be used, and also just to give you the most bandwidth in post afterwards too. So yeah, hopefully that answers the question.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Rookie in the bar sending cheers
Oh,
from
what's up, man?
Peru and saying, I usually shoot the drops or flow of the liquid at 1/250th of a second. And sometimes I get a ghost drop. I saw some of your photos are at 1/100th. What kind of info do you consider for changing the shutter speed using flash?
Yeah. Also, rookie in the bar should change his username because I've seen his work and he's genuinely really good. So I'm like, you're no rookie, man. So, but I've seen he's really talented. But yeah, the ghost drops, that probably has more to do with the flash duration, not your shutter speed. So, yeah, that gets a little tricky. Like that's like how fast your flash is firing. So, and I experience it sometimes too. Like oftentimes, even my more powerful strobes, like the flash, my 1200s are generally very quick. But I think I use some like 400s or 600s on location. Um, and for some of those, like the flash duration is like slightly longer. So that's where you kind of get like this ghost, where you basically looks like motion blur on like a drop or a pour, where it's like you're getting the crisp image, but there's just kind of this little streak. Um, and that has more to do with, yeah, how long the flash is firing. So that's where generally speed lights, which are smaller, not quite as powerful as your big strobes, the flash duration is generally very, very fast. And I don't think I've ever experienced that kind of ghosting with a speed light. With the strobes, for whatever reason, sometimes, um, I don't know if it's just like it's more light, it's flashing for longer. So it kind of depends on the device you're using. That's something maybe you can DM me on Cocktail Camera on Instagram, and we can figure out what device you're using and can kind of see what we can dial in. For some strobes, it's just like using it on a different power level. Sometimes in a manual, it'll tell you like a certain power level and then like the flash duration. It's always these weird decibel fractions and all of that. But that's what that's referring to is like the flash duration. You can try adjusting your shutter speed as well, but it's more likely how long the flash is actually firing. But yeah, DM me, man, and I'll see if I can help you out with that one. So yeah, and really same to anyone is, I mean, I have only a certain amount of time and all of that, but if you have questions, you're welcome to DM me on Instagram at Cocktail Camera as well. I try to answer on there as much as possible whenever I can. It might not be immediate, but I'm always down to nerd out with you and help answer questions when I can. So yeah.
Awesome. We had some questions popping up on glassware. Does it
Yeah.
affect the shot? Is there anything where it's like, as professionals know, this is your realm. If there's something that doesn't look right, like, there's different types of glasses for different types of cocktails. If you pour a cocktail in the wrong type of glass, does it completely throw off the shot? Do you ever do it for creative effect? Can you talk glassware for a moment?
Yeah, I mean, glassware is, it's something where it kind of helps to learn a bit about just cocktails and mixology. Here I'm dropping in the link for the e-course with the code applied, so that's in the chat there. At least I did that to host and panelists. So anyway,
We'll
you
get
can
it
DM
covered
me
for
for
you.
that too. But yeah, with glassware, it's I mean, generally like there's with especially certain classic cocktails, it's like there's certain glassware that is just like traditional. Basically anything that's served up, that's served without ice, you generally serve it in something with a stem. um those pieces of glassware are generally called a coupe. Anything with ice, you're serving in a rocks glass, which is kind of shorter, stubbier glass. You generally aren't putting ice into a coupe. That can like break the coupe and all of that. But so there are like certain basic guidelines or certain traditions, but it's something where I feel like, again, when it comes to the art of beverage photography, like it's not like there's all these hard and fast rules either. There's certain things where there are just like a lot of preferences where sometimes when I'm shooting for a bar or restaurant, they have all of their glassware in the freezer because when they serve their drinks, they want their glassware to be frozen and cold, and just so you aren't getting a warm glass and a cold drink. But then when you're photographing, you kind of get this fog on the glass, which can look cool. But then if you don't pour it in time, half of it's fogged up, half of it's not, and it looks kind of not as clean. So there's stuff like that where that's just kind of, as with my experience of doing this, I'll ask ahead of time, like, do you want the kind of chilled glassware? If not, you want to pull out your glassware ahead of time, allow that to get to room temperature. That way you actually capture more details of the liquid going in the glass. So it's kind of more of a preference thing based on who you're shooting for or what you're shooting for. So yeah, and then there's things too, like for my own personal preference, like I showed with a lot of images in this, I'm backlighting a lot of stuff. I like having as many kind of cool details as possible. So I like grabbing glassware that is faceted. This is like a mixing glass I had down here for making stirred cocktails. It has all these kind of etchings in it. And that type of detail just catches the light in a really cool way. Again, just finding little ways that kind of add interest to your imagery. So it's more of a preference thing. Again, there are some guidelines and traditions, but generally it just kind of comes down to who you're shooting for and what their preferences are. So
Awesome. I will remind everybody, Jordan's going to be back tomorrow. So we'll get to the gear
yeah,
stuff. Tomorrow, we're talking best lenses for food and beverage photography. So tomorrow will be a
yeah,
little, we'll dive into gear and settings and all
yeah.
that. We'll get one last question in for today. Tim asking if there is a good place to get feedback on the photos they're taking. I mean, Look,
Mm.
I'll say this: someone who critiques photography on a regular basis, I wouldn't know what I was looking at.
Yeah.
I can tell you from an untrained eye, but there's a lot of stuff here. A lot of this is nuance. A lot of this is stuff that I wouldn't think to look at, or I wouldn't even
Sure.
know if it's right or wrong. Is there any
Right.
communities out there or any place that people can go that you
Yeah.
know of?
Right. I mean, there's a few. We do this a bit in the e-course because we have like a private member forum where members kind of post their photos, and I jump in there, and it's also just other members from the course are very interactive and help as well. But I found some just kind of open, like honestly, like I don't use Facebook hardly at all anymore, except for the groups. There's some really cool photography groups. There's one, I have to find the exact name, but it's like food and product photography. So it's not beverage specific, but it's a lot of the food photo world is a lot larger, kind of more mainstream. I guess there's not as much action in the beverage photography quite yet. It's on the rise, but food photography, everyone eats, not everyone drinks cocktails, So I've found some really good Facebook communities. Again, if you can DM me, I can try to find those if you really want to jump into one of those. But there's a one or two in particular that I pop into where people feel generally, for the most part, supportive. You always get some crusty guys in there tearing stuff apart. For the most part, it's a good community of just like you can post your work, get feedback, more on the technical side and the styling side of things. And again, it's kind of a general kind of food product community. And I've seen some, I'll post drink stuff in there every now and then just to get people's thoughts, but I'll see if I can find that and maybe share that on IG.
Awesome, perfect. And as Jordan said, join his community. He's got a lot going on there, a lot of education. He does. Look, I watch your stuff all the time, and I don't even shoot food and drink. I mean, it's interesting, it's beautiful, and I think you can gain so much. I've always said product photographers are the most technically and visually sound in a lot of regards, and a lot of people take what they learn in product photography and then move on to fashion and other commercial stuff just because you have to have the
Right.
technical in products. So look, having a great community like you have through what you're doing on your own is a great place, and people should be investing in their work. So this is an unsolicited prompting to you guys. Look, invest in your work, and a lot of times there are unintended benefits where you're talking and meeting other photographers, and you're building out your network so that you don't have to go on a Facebook group and deal with people who are angrily posting
Yeah.
throughout their workday.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So, Jordan, huge thank you to you again. I want to also thank Sony for hosting today's event. And
Yeah.
Jordan will be back tomorrow. Again, we're talking gear tomorrow. We're talking about the lenses for
Yeah.
food and drink photography. So you'll get Jordan's recommendations on those. And of course, we'll get more questions. So if you didn't get your question answered today, come back in and re-ask it tomorrow. But
Yeah.
Jordan, good to see you as always, man. I'm looking forward to tomorrow.
Yeah, totally. You too. Yeah, I'm excited to have a kind of double feature, 2 days in a row. So
Love it. Love it. Same bat time, same bat channel. We will see
yeah,
you guys right back here for more
yeah.
free education. That is it. That's all we have for right now. Another edition of the BNH virtual event space now in the books. Catch y'all next time.
Love it. Thanks, everybody.